You keep thinking that wealth is going to arrive as one giant jackpot, like one lucky break or one perfect opportunity, one sudden miracle that changes everything overnight. But your future self needs you to understand something. Real wealth usually begins much quieter than that. It begins the moment someone stops living in survival mode. And honestly, that's the part nobody really ever talks about because your future self keeps showing me that you've spent so much of your life emotionally surviving that your nervous system forgot what expansion even feels like. You became used to pressure, to stress, to barely exhaling, used to carrying the weight of what if nothing works out? And when someone lives like that long enough, they stop dreaming properly. Not because they aren't capable, but because survival shrinks imagination. But something inside of you has been waking up lately, and you can feel it. That restless feeling, that pull towards something bigger, that quiet voice saying, there has to be more than this. That voice matters because later in this reading, your future self wants to explain why wealth is not just money, it's also identity. And the version of you capable of holding abundance is very different from the version of you who only learned how to survive. Your future self is showing me that one of the biggest shifts happening inside of you right now is emotional, not financial. Because wealth enters differently when someone finally believes they deserve stability. So sit with that for just a second. Wealth enters differently when someone finally believes that they deserve it. Because some of you grew up around instability for so long that peace almost feels suspicious to your nervous system. You learn to expect stress, to expect disappointment, to expect struggle. And without realizing it, you started building your identity around endurance instead of expansion. That changes the way people receive opportunities. Because when someone unconsciously believes that life must be hard, they often reject ease without realizing it. They overwork, they overcomplicate, they undervalue themselves, and they stay loyal to exhaustion. Your future self says this is the month where you begin emotionally separating yourself from the identity of struggle because your soul is tired of carrying scarcity like a personality trait. And honestly, I think you're starting to notice that you're beginning to realize how much of your life has been spent preparing for disaster instead of preparing for abundance. That realization changes people because wealth is not only built through strategy, it's also built through emotional capacity. The ability to feel safe receiving more, holding more, and becoming more. And your future self says that this next chapter of your life is not just about making money, it's also about becoming someone who no longer abandons themselves emotionally every single time that their life starts to improve. And that is super important because a lot of people can attract money temporarily, but very few people know how to emotionally hold on to it. And the part nobody realizes is that wealth often exposes self worth issues first. That's why some people sabotage opportunities. They delay their dreams, they stay hidden, they play small, they talk themselves out of being visible. Because deep down, part of them still believes people like me don't get to live this kind of life. But your future self says something is breaking inside of you right now. Not in like a painful way, but in a liberating way. You're beginning to outgrow the emotional ceiling that you inherited from survival mode. That's why things have felt emotionally strange lately. Your spirit is expanding faster than your old identity can keep up with. And that creates a sort of tension because one version of you still wants certainty before movement, and another version already knows that if I keep waiting to feel fully ready, I'll stay here forever. And that second voice, that's your future self. The version who already knows that your life becomes completely different the moment you stop treating your dreams like fantasies and start treating them like responsibilities. Because your future self keeps showing me something very clearly. You're not meant to spend your entire life constantly exhausted. You are not meant to wake up every single day feeling emotionally trapped inside of all of these limitations. And no, this isn't about becoming obsessed with luxury or status or class. It's much deeper than that. Your future self says that wealth is freedom, freedom to rest, freedom to breathe, freedom to stop making every decision from fear, freedom to help the people that you love, freedom to create, freedom to experience life instead of merely just surviving it. And honestly, some of you haven't allowed yourselves to want wealth fully, not deeply, because somewhere along the way you learned to associate money with guilt or greed or pressure or becoming someone bad. And you know exactly what I mean. We all have heard it. So and so is an evil, rich man. But your future self wants you to hear this. Money does not corrupt someone's soul, it amplifies who they already are. And your future self keeps showing me that your heart was never meant to stay trapped in a scarcity mentality, in a scarce mentality. You're someone who wants to create safety, beauty, peace, generosity, and comfort. And that matters because wealth in the hands of emotionally aware people creates healing far beyond themselves. And the part that nobody realizes about manifestation is that the universe often expands people internally before it expands them externally. And that's the season many of you are in right now, internal expansion. That means you're becoming more disciplined, more emotionally aware, more intentional, more honest about what you want. And that internal shift is quietly changing your future already. Because wealth leaves clues before it arrives physically. Your future self keeps showing me that you're entering a season where your standards are changing. You don't want to live in a constant state of chaos anymore. You don't want emotionally draining environments anymore. You don't want to constantly prove your worth anymore. Honestly, that's part of becoming abundant because abundance is not only what enters your life financially, but it's also about what you stop tolerating. And I think some of you are beginning to realize that you've spent years with putting energy into things that were never growing your future. That could be people or distractions or fears or emotional survival or overthinking or waiting. And your future self says this next version of you becomes powerful because they stop scattering their energy everywhere and focus, and that focus changes your life. It's not frantic energy, it's not desperation, it's clarity. Because your future self keeps repeating something. Your life changes the moment your energy becomes intentional. That's why your desires feel stronger lately. Your dreams are more vivid. That's why settling feels heavier. That's why your current reality feels emotionally uncomfortable. Your soul is beginning to recognize that you were made for more than just coping. And honestly, I think part of you already knows exactly what you need to do next. You just keep waiting for permission to do it. But your future self says wealth rarely arrives through hesitation. It arrives through self trust, through movement, through action, through visibility. It arrives through consistency. It arrives through becoming emotionally available for expansion. And your future self wants to talk about fear for just a minute. Because some of you think fear means to stop what you're doing. Don't go there. But honestly, most transformations begin with fear. Not because you're on the wrong path, but because your old identity knows it's about to change. That's why growth feels emotionally vulnerable sometimes. Your current self wants guarantees. Your future self understands trust. That's the difference. And I think that's why this message found you right now. Because your future self says the wealth you desire is connected to the identity you're becoming, not the identity that you've been stuck inside of. The exhausted version of you cannot hold the same reality as the expanded version of you. And that's why your habits are changing. Your tolerance is changing. Your mindset is changing. You're preparing emotionally for a larger life, not just financially, energetically. Your future self keeps showing me something really beautiful. There's going to come a moment where you stop feeling guilty for wanting more. And that moment is going to change everything because once someone stops apologizing for their desires, their energy becomes magnetic, not arrogant, not loud, but clear. And clarity attracts opportunities faster than desperation ever will. That's why your future self says your next level of wealth does not arrive through chasing. It arrives through alignment, through becoming someone whose daily habits finally match the life they keep imagining. And honestly, I think some of you are closer than you realize, not because life suddenly becomes perfect, but because your internal world is finally shifting. And the external world always follows the identity of the internal world. That's the part most people give up before seeing. They quit during the invisible season, the season where nothing looks different yet, but everything inside them is changing. What your future self is showing me is kind of like sowing a seed in soil. We might think, oh, nothing's happening because we don't see it sprouting through the ground yet. But it's already starting to manifest underneath the dirt, underneath the soil before it sprouts through. A season where nothing looks different yet, but everything inside them is changing. Your future self says, don't quit there. The invisible season is sacred because roots grow underground first. And some of you are building roots right now that will support a completely different life later. That's why your spirit feels restless. You're outgrowing emotional environments that cannot support the life that you're trying to build. And honestly, wealth requires separation sometimes, separation from old habits, old identities, old mindsets, old patterns. Not because you're becoming better than anyone, but because your future demands different energy now. And your future self says this next chapter of your life is going to feel emotionally lighter than your past because you'll stop carrying unnecessary suffering internally. That's real wealth, too. Peace is wealth, health is wealth, freedom is wealth, self trust is wealth, confidence is wealth. And ironically, those are the exact energies that often attract financial abundance naturally. Because abundance flows toward expansion. Your future self says that one day you're going to look back at this current version of you with so much compassion because you'll realize how hard you were trying while still carrying old survival patterns inside your nervous system. And honestly, you were never lazy. You were exhausted. But exhaustion is not your destiny. Your future self says your life changes the moment you stop identifying with limitation. Stop pretending, not forcing positivity. Actually, changing the way you see yourself because the wealthiest version of you already exists energetically. Calm, focused, grounded, intentional, generous. And every decision you make now either moves you closer to that version or further away. But your future self says something powerful is already happening. You're beginning to believe your future can actually expand. That belief changes behavior. Behaviors change reality, and reality changes life. That's why this message found you, not to convince you that wealth exists. Your soul already knows that. This message found you because your future self is trying to remind you that abundance was never only about money. It was always about becoming someone who finally feels safe enough to fully receive. Until next time, stay magnetic, friends.